Welcome to American History. This is a documentary about slavery in the South. Today we will be discussing 2 points of view. One point of view will come from 2 plantation owners in the South who also own slaves. The other point of view will come from 2 Northerners who live in the North and who oppose slavery. We will ask them how they feel about the treatment of slaves, Congress, and the expansion of states. At the end, we will give you our opinion.
The Mason-Dixon line was created long before slavery was a problem in the United States. Seeing as the South has many farms, the South began to adapt to slavery. They needed people to help with planting and harvesting cotton, so slaves seemed like the perfect answer. North of the Mason-Dixon line, there weren't as many farmlands. This helped influence the idea that slavery was not ideal. The Missouri Compromise was when the government discussed if Missouri should be a free state or a state of slavery. In an effort to preserve the balance of power in Congress, the Missouri Compromise was passed in 1820, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state.
Hello, sir. I would like to ask you some questions.
Okay, whatever.
I would like to know how you feel about the treatment of slaves.
Well, obviously, I think they get what they deserve, but I have a granddaughter here that can give you a better description.
Hello, my name is Emma Falconer. This man here is my grandfather. This is really how slaves were treated. By 1830, slavery was primarily located in the South, where it existed in many different forms. African Americans were enslaved on small farms, large plantations, in cities and towns, inside homes, out in the fields, and in industry and transportation. Slaves established in the South were forced to live under a set of laws called the slave codes. It varied depending on the state. The overall message was the same. The slaves were considered property, not people, and were treated as such. Slaves could not testify in court against a white, make contracts, leave the plantation without permission, strike a white, even in self-defense, buy and sell goods, own firearms, gather without a white present, possess any anti-slavery literature, or visit the homes of whites or free blacks.
How do you feel?
Also, without slaves, the cotton economy would collapse. The tobacco crop would dry. The rice would cease being profitable. Defenders of slavery argued that if slaves were freed, a widespread unemployment and chaos, this would lead to uprising, bloodshed, and anarchy.
Surrender of life is nothing to sinking down into acknowledgement of inferiority. This basically means that killing people is little compared to accepting people into society who are lesser than you. This was said by John C. Calhoun, a man who was in large favor of expanding slavery into the whole U.S.
Here with me, I have 2 men from the North. Could I ask you some questions?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about the treatment of slaves?
The treatment of slaves ranged from mild to cruel and horrible. Husbands, wives, and children were often sold away from one another, and punishment by whipping was not unusual.
We feel that slavery is wrong and it should be abolished completely, but not everyone felt that way. The expansion of states led to confusion about where slavery was legal in America.
An abolitionist named John Brown did not want slavery to expand into the West, or anywhere for that matter. Brown and 21 of his followers killed 5 slave owners in Kansas of 1859. In a letter to his brother, Frederick Brown, John wrote, "I have told my wife that I would like to raise a Negro child, teach him the love of God, and tell him that he is equal to all man. I feel that I would like to do this strongly because regardless of the color of your skin, the Constitution states that all are equal and all have a chance at life. God grants liberty only to those who love it and are always ready to guard and defend it." This is a quote by Daniel Webster, an abolitionist from the North.
In case you didn't know what the Louisiana Purchase is, it was a purchase of territory from France. Without the purchase, we would not have Arkansas, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Minnesota, Montana, and Colorado.
Thank you.
Oh, and also, king cotton was just a term used to describe how big the cotton industry was in the South.
I have heard something said about allegiance to the South. I know no South, no North, no East, no West to which I owe any allegiance. This quote is by Henry Clay, a man who played a crucial role in the development of the Missouri Compromise.
Hello, men. Do you know if slavery ever expanded into the West?
The question of whether or not slavery would be allowed in the new western states shadowed every conversation about the frontier. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise had attempted to resolve this question. It had admitted Missouri.
However, the Missouri Compromise did not apply to the new territories that were not part of the Louisiana Purchase, and so the issue of slavery continued to fester as the nation expanded.
I think that the slave expansion to the West should not have expanded. Not a lot of land could be farmed, considering it was mostly desert. Therefore, the West should have been free land. I see what they did, though, expanding the Mason-Dixon line to be fair. However, I honestly wish slavery was never a thing in the first place.
I actually don't think slavery should have expanded because the slaves were treated unfairly. They were made to do work without pay. No, slavery should not have expanded into the West. Slaves should have been free in the West.
Slavery should not have moved into the West. African Americans should have been able to be free in the West. I also believe that if a slave escaped their plantation and made it to the North, they should be a free man or woman.
I don't believe that slavery should have advanced westward. I believe this because the South was taking more power than they could handle. When the plantation owners moved west, they can't afford to pay a workforce, so they moved slavery west.
I believe that slavery should not have expanded west. I believe that slaves should have been able to be free. But I do get where the farmers were coming from because they did not want to pay every person for workforce.
I believe that slavery should not have expanded into the West. I believe this because slaves should have been free in the West and in the North. Once they crossed the Mason-Dixon line into the North, they weren't always free.
Thank you for joining us for American History. America!